And we are live. Now, I guess while we're live now, before we get started, if anyone's here already, hello, hello. Nice to have you here. We'll get started with Cheryl in a second, but we'll give some people a little bit of time to actually make their way into the webinar. So if you are here already, why don't you leave your name? I mean, your name will be there, but feel free in the chat to say where you're from. If you've been with us before, this is one of my favorite parts of the webinar is just to kind of see where people from around the world are joining us. So if you're here, please feel free to write in the chat and let us know where you're from. Cheryl, I'm sure you'll be a little bit surprised to find out that we sometimes we get people from all over the world and different time zones. It's a lot of fun.
That's great. That's great.
Maybe we'll have some people from Maryland. Who knows? Anyone from Maryland? Give a little shout out in the chat, perhaps.
That's right, please. Great. I don't want to know if any of my friends are on. I like it to be anonymous.
We'll find out soon enough, I'm sure.
Right.
Oh, there we go. Let's see. Oh, we got Howdy from Alabama. Hello to you in Alabama. Usually we get people from all over the states. Some people from the UK. We've had some we got hello from North Carolina. I think we've often we'll have people from like Australia show up in the recording the next day. But let's see what we got. We got some people here. Anyone else? From Georgia. So we got the South representing real hard so far. Anyone from the Northeast? Come on. There we go. We got some Massachusetts.
Oh, great.
All right, yeah, we're giving people some time to get here. Oh, we got some Michigan,
Sure.
a little bit of a little Central, Ontario, Canada. There we go. We got someone else from another country. We hit the jackpot. All right, so why don't we? While people are strolling in, but why don't we get started?
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for joining us for another Photomyne webinar. I'm Matthew from Photomyne, and this is Managing Your Printed Photos with Cheryl DiFrank. She's a professional photo organizer and founder of My Memory File. Now, before we begin, and I let Cheryl take the floor, I just have a few quick reminders and announcements, like always, especially you'll know exactly what's coming if you've been with us before. But at the end of the webinar, within the next day or so, we'll send an email with a recording to the webinar. So just in case you had to step away, or you wanted to send it to someone else, we'll make sure that you have the whole recording. You can get the whole presentation so you can really understand how to manage your printed photos right. In addition, because we're in the month of September now, we're also going to send a link to Save Your Photos Month. You can catch, if you check out our Facebook page, you can see a lot more about Save Your Photos Month. There's a ton of different videos and speakers and all these different events throughout the month. It's a free event, so you can really it's a great resource for you if you're looking for different ways to save and share your photos. In addition, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please write them in the chat. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A, whether they're for Cheryl or for myself. Feel free to write them in there, and we will certainly get to as many as we can. And other than that, I think we're ready to begin. Cheryl, thanks for being here. Why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm so excited to be here and talk about managing your print photos. Thanks everyone for joining us today to talk about organizing and managing your print photos. Again, as Matthew said, my name is Cheryl DiFrank, and I'm a professional photo organizer and owner of My Memory File, specializing in organizing and preserving both print and digital photo collections. I've been working in this field for almost 10 years, and I absolutely love helping people get their photos organized and seeing their relief when they know that all their family photos are safe. Prior to starting My Memory File, I was the owner of a stock photo agency for 25 years. We represented over 400 photographers around the world, licensing their photos for advertising and other uses. We opened that business just as scanning photos started to take off in the early 1990s. So everything I learned from managing a professional file of 500,000 images, plus riding the wave as digital photos became mainstream, helped me transition into helping individual clients keep their own collections safe and organized. I'm also a member of the Photo Managers, which is an association of photo organizers and professionals from around the world. Our members help individuals and businesses with every aspect of photo and video organization and preservation. So today I'm going to talk about the best way to get all your old print photos organized, so you can find the photos when you need to, store them safely, and be able to share and enjoy them for generations. I know this may seem like a daunting task, depending on the current state of your print photos, but I'm going to show you how to break it down into manageable steps to keep you from getting overwhelmed and hopefully have fun in the process. So let's mentally prepare for the project before you get started. Why sort before scanning? In many cases, your ultimate goal may be to scan or digitize, or at least part of your print photos. Though we don't have enough time in this webinar to get into the process or options for digitizing, I hope it's part of your plan, as digitizing the photos acts as a backup if anything happens to the original prints. And it also makes it easy to share your photos with friends and family anywhere in the world. If digitizing is the ultimate goal, it may be tempting to just start scanning photos instead of organizing them first. But I'll stress that it's critical to get the prints organized before scanning. Digitizing before or without organizing will just result in a digital mess, which can actually be much harder to manage. Also, know your limits. There's no denying that it will be an emotional and tiring process. You'll be reviewing decades of photos and reliving all those memories: weddings, births, parties, graduations, watching children grow up all over again. Even though we tend to only take photos of the happy moments, you may find yourself on an emotional roller coaster during the process. You'll also be challenging your brain to remember when you took that trip or what year a child graduated high school, when there's no indication on the photo. So be prepared to just work on the project for a couple hours at a time. Give yourself breaks. Otherwise, that's when it becomes exhausting and drudgery and may never get finished. And finally, enjoy the process. Remember why you're doing it. You took the photos for a reason, to preserve those memories. You'll come across photos that you haven't looked at for years and some that you've probably never seen. Take time to enjoy those memories again. To be able to easily share the memories and pass them down to generations is one of the best gifts you can give your loved ones. So let's take a look at what you might be starting with. The photo on the left is what many of us have: a combination of photo albums, often with photos falling out of the album, boxes and bags of loose prints and negatives, 35mm slides and boxes or carousels, often mixed in with other memorabilia such as artwork, invitations, or event programs. The photo on the right is what your organized photos will look like after you're done. All the prints sorted into order, divided by date or event in photo-safe boxes. In this particular example, that little booklet in front of the boxes is actually a case for a USB thumb drive containing scans of all the print photos in those boxes, which makes a wonderful gift for family. I promise you can get there. Just take one step at a time. So I want to give you an overview of what we'll cover today. The first step is to gather all your photos together in one place and prepare your workspace, including some helpful supplies to have on hand before you start. There are a few things you'll want to think about before you dive in, such as what you'll do with any photos in albums and how you'll handle any slides or negatives. You may also want to think about different sorting strategies, as one sorting method may work better for you than others, and you don't want to have to change your approach after you've gotten partway through. I'll give you some tips to make the sorting process easier, especially when photos don't have clear dates or identifying information. We'll talk about the ABC method of sorting photos, which helps to weed out the photos that you probably don't need versus the photos that best tell your story. And finally, even though we won't get deep into scanning or digitizing in this webinar, you'll want to think about what photos you will scan and how you'll identify them, in addition to the best way to safely store your organized prints. So the first step before anything else is to gather all your photos together in one place. That includes any albums, boxes of loose photos, framed photos, whether you'll be keeping the photo in the frame or not, school photos and other portraits, envelopes of photos from the developer like Motophoto or Ritz, any slides, negatives, and other memorabilia that might be mixed in with the photos. Check the attic, the basement, closets, storage units, under beds, anywhere you might have stored photos. You might be inclined to just start with a subset of photos, maybe just the boxes in the attic or just the albums first. I'd caution against doing this. Collecting everything together at once may make the project seem more daunting, and it may be tempting to just deal with one subset of photos first and add in more later. But getting it all together first will help you really see what you've got and give you the best overview of the project. It will actually help make the process more efficient. And it's probably no surprise that this project will take up some space. I recommend using a large table, a dining room table, a folding table, or even a ping pong table that maybe isn't being used. You'll need some space to spread out. If possible, the table should be a comfortable height to avoid strain on your neck and back. You'll also want a comfortable supportive chair and good lighting. As I mentioned, this project won't be done in an afternoon. So if you have a table or a workspace that can be left set up for the duration of the project, you'll avoid having to put away and relay out everything in between working sessions. Of course, if a dedicated workspace is not an option, you'll just need to clearly mark your progress in between sessions. In addition to a comfortable workspace, there are certain supplies that will be good to have on hand before you start. Index cards can be used to label piles of sorted photos into decades or years or certain events. Similarly, Post-it notes are an easy way to temporarily label groups of photos or to attach notes to the backs of photos. Envelopes, Ziploc bags, and temporary storage boxes are helpful, especially if you will need to put things away in between sorting sessions. For temporary storage, I like the cardboard shoebox size photo boxes sold at craft stores like Michael's. I don't recommend those boxes for long-term storage, but they are an inexpensive option during the sorting process. It might also be helpful to have cotton gloves or finger cots on hand to avoid getting fingerprints on the photos. Finger cots can also help in grabbing the slippery prints. Also consider collecting any important dates to have as a reference before you start sorting. Birthdays, especially those of previous generations or older family members, that might not come to mind easily. Dates of any big trips, weddings, graduations, deaths, home moves. Even if you don't necessarily have a photo of a certain event, you can use the dates you've collected to create a timeline to help date other photos. For instance, you may not have a photo of your grandfather's birth, but if you come across a photo of his high school graduation, which usually occurred at age 18, and you know when he was born, you can do the math to figure out when the graduation occurred. Before you start, think about how you'll handle photos in albums. Think about whether you want to put the photos back into the albums after scanning. Those albums may be just collecting dust and taking up space, or even falling apart. And the goal might be to take the photos out, scan them, and then store the prints in photo-safe boxes. On the other hand, sometimes it's nice to still have a physical album to flip through, especially for older family members that may not be comfortable viewing photos on a screen. If photos are to go back into an album after scanning, you'll want to remove the prints from the album, but keep them separated from the rest of the photos, rather than sorting them in with everything else, to make it easier to put them back into the album after scanning. Keep in mind that if you have any of the magnetic albums, those are the albums most of us used in the 80s with the sticky pages and the clear plastic overlays, it's best not to continue to use these albums. The glue and the plastic overlays have probably already and will continue to degrade the photos. Once you remove the photos from these albums, if you decide to put those photos back into the album after scanning, it's best to purchase what I call slot or sleeve albums, where photos are simply inserted into plastic sleeves, usually 3 to 5 per page. What if the photos can't be removed from an album? Sometimes the photos in those old magnetic albums will fall out easily, and other times they're stuck tight and won't budge. There are a couple tricks I'll recommend in a minute to try and loosen those photos, but sometimes they can't be removed without damaging the print. And then there are the albums where the photos were actually glued to the page using craft glue or rubber cement. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but now the photos won't budge. In these cases, there may be no way to remove those photos, especially if prints are glued to both sides of each page, making it impossible to even cut the pages themselves. In these cases, I recommend scanning the photos right from the page. You may not be able to store the prints individually, but at least you can scan each photo separately. Also consider leaving photos in albums if there is identifying information or handwritten notes on the pages with the prints. Removing the photos from those pages will separate the photo from the corresponding information. In these cases, I might recommend scanning again the entire page as a whole to retain the information or any other notes. There is a way to add this kind of information to the individual scanned photo after it's scanned, but that'll have to be covered in a different webinar on scanning and adding metadata. As I mentioned a moment ago, if you do have photos that are hard to remove from sticky album pages, you can try a liquid adhesive remover like Undo, available at most craft stores and on Amazon. It's an alcohol-based solvent that will dissolve the glue but won't harm the photo itself. Though depending on the age of the photo, I would recommend trying a little bit on a corner of the print just to be safe. You might also try using a length of unwaxed dental floss and slowly working it back and forth under a corner of the photo to separate the photo from the page. A craft spatula can also be helpful, as well as using a hair dryer on a low setting to melt the glue. Finally, I've also been successful putting an album page in the freezer for 20 minutes. The cold can make the glue more brittle, and often the photo will be easier to remove. But the most important tool for removing photos from albums is patience. It will be used consistently, and hopefully you don't run out. So think about what sorting strategy will work best for you. As I mentioned before, take time to think about this because you don't want to get partway through the process and realize you should have sorted differently. The most popular method is to sort chronologically. You can sort by decade, further by year, and sometimes even by month within each year, all depending on how many photos you have within each time period and how easy or hard it would be to identify the day, month, or even the year a photo was taken. For instance, if you have a small number of photos taken between 1920 and 1940, it probably doesn't make sense to agonize over what month each photo was taken. In fact, it may be adequate to just identify which decade each photo belongs in, if the particular year is not easily identified. But if you've got hundreds of photos of children growing up in the 80s and 90s, it may be easier to sort down to the month or season in each year because you'll probably be more familiar with the time period and the ages of the children. You may also want to identify certain events within each year that are either recurring events, like birthdays or holidays, or to identify big events like weddings or vacations within certain years. Here are some examples of what your sorting groups might look like, depending on how deep you want to sort chronologically. Each example gets a little more specific, starting with decades and going all the way down to individual months. And sometimes you may not decide how deep you want to sort until you get into the project. For instance, you may start by sorting into decades and then find that you have a large number of photos from the 70s, that it's worth sorting those down to the individual year within the 70s. Similarly, you may find you have enough photos in certain years that it makes sense to sort them into seasons or months and certain special events. So let's get back to a couple other sorting strategies that are sometimes used. Some people may prefer to sort by themes or recurring or special events like birthdays, holidays, or vacations. Those events tend to represent a large portion of our photo collections. However, I would ask yourself what you'll do with any photos that don't fit into one of those themes or event categories. What about the everyday photos of the situations that aren't necessarily an event? Here are some examples from my own collection. Friends and I playing in the creek behind our house when we were children, my mom being silly, and her cross-country skiing behind our house one snowy day, and other everyday random photos. What theme or event would these fall into? You might also be inclined to sort by person or child. I sometimes have clients that ask me to sort the photos into groups based on which child is in the photo, with the intention of giving each of their children the photos of themselves. That might make sense for all the photos of Susie playing soccer. Her siblings may not be as interested in those photos. But what about all the photos with more than one child in the photo? Which child's pile do those go into? Also, think about what happens when photos from a particular event are separated by person. If we take all the photos from a vacation and separate them into different groups based on who's in the photo, the overall context of that vacation can get lost. In this example, those are two photos of my sister on the left that could get sorted into her pile, but they would then be separated from all the photos on the right from that same great vacation. The two photos of her alone don't tell the whole story, but those other photos on the right might be sorted into someone else's pile. And of course, once the photos are scanned, you can easily make multiple copies of any photo to give to multiple people. So for the group photo of 10 cousins all together, for the group photo of all 10 cousins all together at a holiday, once that print is scanned, with a click of the mouse, you can make 10 copies of that scan and send it off to each person in the photo. Even easier, you can upload that one scan to a sharing website and email everyone a link that they can then download. So you no longer have to decide who gets which photos. For all these reasons, I personally prefer sorting chronologically, but I'll admit that certain collections may lend themselves to sorting by event or person in unique situations. But for the remainder of our talk, I'm going to focus on sorting chronologically. We mentioned earlier that you may have slides and negatives in your collection. It can be hard to know what to do with these. On the one hand, it can be harder to view slides and negatives to even determine what the photo is of. They are smaller and usually require a loupe or a magnifying glass to see clearly. And negatives can be difficult to identify simply due to the fact that they're negatives. However, the scan from a slide or a negative will often be much sharper and richer than a scan made from the print of the same photo. Here's an example. The scan on the left was the scan made from the print, and the scan on the right is made from the negative of the same photo. Excuse me, the printing process simply cannot identify as wide a color spectrum as can be captured in a film negative. On top of that, I'm sure the print had faded over time, yielding a duller scan. So I would much prefer the scan on the right from the negative. Here's just another example, the scan on the left being from the print and the scan on the right from the negative. So the general rule of thumb is that as long as the negatives have been stored safely and are still in good condition, you'll get a better quality scan from the negative over the print. When it comes to slides, it was not as common to have both a slide and a print of the same photo. If you have slides of certain photos, that may be all you have. So you'll just need to decide which, if any, of the slides you want to scan. The catch with slides and negatives is that the process to scan them is a little more complex than the process to scan print photos. Depending on the scanning method you choose, you may need additional equipment and software to scan slides or negatives. So to summarize, slides and negatives can often yield better quality scans, but they can also be harder to view and select for scanning and can be more costly or time-consuming to scan. So it may come down to a decision between scan quality, cost, and convenience. But either way, you'll want to store them safely in slide boxes or photo-safe sheets or sleeves as pictured in this slide. Very often, if you have prints still in the envelopes from the developer, you find the original negatives in the envelope as well. Clients often ask me if they should store the negatives separately or keep them with the prints. Regardless of whether you decide to scan from the negatives or the prints, I recommend that you store them together. The prints will be a quick way to identify what the negatives are. Once they're separated, it's much more difficult to recognize what the negatives are and where they belong. So I know I've spent a lot of time so far talking about preparation and all the things to think about before you start the actual sort process. But I promise that thinking about all of these things up front will save a lot of frustration and repeated work later. But now that you've done all the preparation, you're ready to start. I recommend starting with any photos in albums or photos still in the envelopes from the developers. Usually all the photos in a particular album will be from a certain time period or event, so they're already effectively pre-sorted. The same is true for any prints still in the developer envelopes. They'll be from a single roll of film taken at a certain time. Sometimes there will even be a date or year printed on the envelope, or maybe a receipt tucked inside to help date the photos. Or the developer may have printed the developing month or year on the backs of the prints. Photos from albums and envelopes may be easier to date and therefore can be used to create a framework of dates or years that you then sort any loose photos into. When going through the envelopes of photos, you may come across all those double prints we used to get when developing rolls of film. You certainly don't need to scan both duplicate copies of each photo, so this is a good time to remove one copy of all those duplicates. It reduces the number of photos you'll end up storing and reduces confusion during the scanning process later. During the process, you'll undoubtedly also come across a number of photos that don't need to be kept. Blurry photos, underexposed, overexposed, the backs of people's heads, all those photos that we hoped would turn out okay, but we wouldn't know until the film was developed. I'm sure most of you remember what it was like to wait 1 hour to see what your photos looked like. In addition to all those obvious outtakes, there may be lots of scenics with no people in them. Sadly, the photos we took with our film cameras 30 years ago just don't measure up to what we can see today with a quick Google search for the Grand Canyon or Hawaiian sunset. So I may keep 1 or 2 of those scenics for context, but I usually pull out the rest. At this point, I'd also separate out any different media, such as artwork, slides, negatives, letters, cards, or other memorabilia. And once you've used the photos from albums and developer envelopes to create a date framework of decades, years, or months, you can start sorting any loose photos into that framework. There are lots of ways to determine a date that may not be obvious in the photo. First, there may be date information printed on the front or back of the photo. On the front of the photo, there may be a camera date in the lower corner. This will tell you the actual date the photo was taken if the date on the camera was set correctly. If someone didn't take the time to set the date properly when the camera was purchased, those dates may be all incorrect and misleading. If you suspect that the camera date is wrong, you may have to find other clues to determine the correct date. There may also be a digital date printed on the back of the photo. If the print was made from a digital photo, that date may be the actual date the photo was taken because the date is stored within that digital photo. Otherwise, this would also be the date the digital photo was printed. In either case, it will still get you close to the time period the photo was taken. Or there may be a developer date printed on the back of the photo. Keep in mind that this is the date the photos were developed, not the date they were taken. It's not uncommon that you'll find photos from Christmas or Thanksgiving that have a developer date of January, because that's when the film was finally taken to be developed. You may be able to see the photo in the center of this slide is obviously from Christmas, but the date printed by the developer on the front is March of 1972. My assumption would be that the photo is from Christmas of 1971. Also, starting in the late 1990s, some developers provided thumbnail prints of the photos, like the one in the lower right corner, and often these had a date printed on them as well. You might be surprised how many photos you find with some kind of date information that, again, you can easily add to your date framework. If there is no date information anywhere on the print, you may be able to find other clues in the photo. Count the number of candles on the birthday cake, whether a child has braces or not, assuming you know the time period they had braces. Signs or posters in the backgrounds of the photo, or clothing and hairstyles can also be helpful clues. Once, I even used a magnifying glass to read the headline on a newspaper that was sitting on the table in a photo. I Googled the headline and the paper and was able to find the date the edition was published, and therefore the date of the photo within a day or two. It can be a very fun experiment to try and figure these things out. Another trick is to turn all the loose photos over to view the backs of the prints. Every lab used different watermarks on their photo papers over the years. If you sort all the loose photos into groups by the individual watermarks and then turn each pile over, you'll have loosely pre-sorted all the photos into time periods. You might be amazed at how clearly each pile contains photos in a similar period. Just be aware that some watermarks changed just slightly over time, so you just need to be careful to sort the exact same watermarks together. Developer dates can also be found on some slide mounts. Sometimes the year or month are printed in the corner, and sometimes you can find a date actually impressed into the slide mount. You may have to look closely or angle the slide to the light to see it, but it can be very helpful if it's there. Unfortunately, negatives do not have a date printed anywhere on the negative itself. For that reason, once negatives are separated from their prints or from any original packaging, it can be very difficult to see what the negatives are in order to glean any kind of date. So now that you've gotten all the photos sorted chronologically, either by date, year, season, or month, you may still have thousands of photos over multiple decades. To maximize your ability to enjoy the photos, I recommend using the ABC method for finally sorting and prioritizing the photos. As you do a final review of the photos in each time period, each photo can go into one of three groups. A is for album, the best photos that would go into any album, basically what I call the album-worthy photos. B is for box, the supporting players. Not quite good enough to go into an album, but still help to tell the story if anyone ever wants to see all the photos from the birthday party or the vacation. And then C is for can, any photos that aren't needed, blurry, dark, unidentifiable, scenics with no people, things we've already talked about. Sometimes it can be hard to envision what would be an A, album-worthy photo, versus a B, supporting player. Here's an example from my daughter's 4th birthday party. We had a piñata at the party, and I took 1 or 2 photos of every child at the party taking a turn at the piñata, plus a lot of random photos, many of which were dark and didn't turn out well. Personally, I wouldn't put all of these photos into an album, and I don't think my daughter will need to relive each individual person hitting the piñata either. So I picked out the 3 photos on the left as my A photos for this event, and all the photos on the right are the B photos, and there are even more that I couldn't fit into this slide. When my daughter looks through the A photos for that year, she'll have a good memory of her fourth birthday, which was just one of so many photographed events that year. Curating your collection like this makes it much easier for people to enjoy. Very few people will have the attention span to look through thousands of photos over multiple years. Consider the A photos your highlight reel to show your family the best moments in the collection. Then, if they really want more detail on a certain event or time period, they can go to the B photos of that event. As you sort the photos into the ABC groups, that process may also help you decide what you'll scan. Though, again, we don't have time to go into the different scanning options here. Part of the print sorting process is to decide what to scan. It may not be necessary or cost-effective to scan every photo. First, you want to think about who you're scanning for yourself, for your own siblings and extended family, for future generations. Each of these groups may have different interests and priorities, and those interests often overlap. So think about the best way to tell your story for current and future generations. Will you scan all the photos or just the A's, the album-worthy photos you identified? And then we talked about slides and negatives. How will you determine what to scan and what method you'll use to scan them? At the very least, you'll probably need a light box or a light table like these pictured, plus a photo loop, just to be able to view the slides and negatives to select what to scan. And lastly, as discussed earlier, if there are photos that were not able to be removed from their album pages, you'll need to scan the entire page and then crop out the individual photos. Here's an example of an album page that was scanned as a full page, partially because I couldn't easily remove the photos from the photo corners, but also because I wanted to retain the captions and the handwriting written below each photo. Then I cropped out each individual photo as well, so I could view and use them separately. The very last step of organizing your print photos is to store them in photo-safe boxes or envelopes. Two of my favorite resources for photo storage products are Native Archival and Archival Methods. Native Archival makes beautiful photo storage boxes with various configurations of pockets and dividers, depending on the sizes of photos you're storing. Archival Methods offers a wide variety of archival storage options that are all acid-free and photo-safe. Whatever you decide on for final storage, make sure the material is acid-free and be sure to label everything well. After working so hard on this project, you may think you'll remember what everything is, but years later, when you open the box again, or if someone else comes across it down the road, you want to make sure it's clear how everything was organized. You don't want anyone to wonder what was done and worry that they need to do it again. Sometimes people will ask me if they really need to keep their print photos after everything's been scanned. Maybe you're trying to free up valuable storage space or just trying to simplify your paper life. This is a personal decision and there's no right or wrong answer. If you do choose to get rid of all the print photos after scanning, I would certainly make sure that your digitized collection is backed up in more than one place. We usually recommend the 3-2-1 backup rule. 3 copies of your images using 2 different types of media, maybe a hard drive and a USB drive, and store 1 copy off-site, either in the cloud or a safe deposit box or a relative's home. I imagine this would also be covered in any webinar focused on scanning photos. Finally, I mentioned in the beginning that I'm a member of the Photo Managers Trade Association. We have members all over the world that can help with many different aspects of photo organizing, whether you just need a little direction on a project you're doing yourself, or if you want to hand the entire thing over to a professional who can take your mess and return it to you fully sorted and organized. It's as easy as going to the website, typing in your city or zip code, and finding a professional near you. I hope I've been able to demystify the prospect of getting all your print photos organized and give you the confidence to get started. It's one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself and your loved ones to make sure your family's photo story is kept safe and able to be shared. Thank you for joining me today and happy sorting. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Let's see if we have any questions. Anyone, if you have any questions you haven't written in the chat, please write them in the chat and we will get to them as soon as we can. Let's see. Well, so far it looks like we don't have any questions. Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? I mean, with a presentation so clear, I would hope there wouldn't be any questions, but at the same time, I also hope there would be.
It's a lot of information. There's definitely a lot of information to absorb. It's a big project, so I understand if people need to think about it and then kind of absorb it all.
Well, I really don't see. This is this is the first time in all the webinars that I've done that I haven't seen a single question. Oh, wait, I might have spoke too soon. Oh, let's see. Nope, I just still see more people asking about or really listing where they're from. I think one person, it seems as if they might have come in late. It does include how to scan negatives. Well, one thing, I can speak that a little bit. We are at Photomyne, we have an app for scanning negatives, Filmbox, which works really well with, and I know Cheryl spoke about this, a light pad. And one thing I'll actually include in our email after once the webinar is done is I'll include a link to our Amazon page where we have a bunch of different accessories that help with scanning. And that can be something, that just kind of hold, whether you're doing with your phone or whatnot. We have light pads and we have mounts for your phone. So if you're using your phone to scan your photos, that you can, you don't have to worry about holding the phone, things like that. But I'll make sure to add that in the email afterwards. Let's see if we have any more questions. But Cheryl, I was really interested to see that, when you were talking about if those photos are kind of glued into your albums, the idea of using, dental floss to kind of take them off. I thought that was so, it's one of those things that I guess I would never think about on my own, but it's such a household way to do such a task, which is pretty cool.
Right. Between dental floss and hair dryer and freezer, you already have a couple of the resources at your fingertips. But yeah, and patience is, like I said, the most important when removing photos from some of those albums, because it can be very frustrating, and you want to be very careful not to move too fast, and all of a sudden you've ripped the photo. So it can be tricky if depending on how the photos are stuck in there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, it looks like we actually do have some questions. How do you merge from different programs? I imagine that means if you have your photos in different places. It says I scan my slides on my computer already. So do you have any suggestions for people like that that have their photos in different places?
So I assume, of course, they're talking about digital photos and different devices, computers, and so on. Of course, I'm happy to answer it. It's a much bigger discussion about organizing digital photos. But the first step in any project with digital photos is just getting everything in one place. I recommend getting a separate hard drive, like a 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte hard drive. They're very inexpensive. They're relatively inexpensive, $50 or $60. And just copying all of the photos from any online storage, from any old computers, from any other devices, just kind of getting them in one place, similar to what I recommend for the print photos. You just really don't know what you have until they're all in the same place together. And then the next process, then the next step in the project is usually removing duplicates, which there's software for that. Again, I could do an entire webinar on that, but I don't think we have time for that today. But yeah, definitely the first step is always, again, just like the print photos, getting them in one place, copying them all into one place.
Well, thanks for that little preview. And this is actually a great question we have here. What do you do with photos of people you don't know? That's a great question.
That is a great question. And of course, it's going to depend on the situation. So for instance, if it's I can think of a couple different scenarios. If it's a picture of someone you don't know that is, maybe at an event that you were at in the past 20 years or something, and you're quite sure they're not family, then I would say you probably don't need to keep it if you don't even know who that person is. Some people will say, well, let me check with my family to see if they know, and if you can identify that person. But really it just comes down to, if you don't know who they are, there's probably no point in keeping the photo. The other question that kind of comes up is, what about really old photos? Older previous generations, black and white, these little print photos. A lot of times those can be very hard to identify if there is no information in an album. Those can be harder emotionally to get rid of, because you think, okay, I maybe someone knows who this is, but it really kind of comes down to how much research you're willing to do to figure out who it is. In some cases, especially if that person shows up a lot, that probably indicates that might be someone important or someone that, the family knew or was related to. I might scan a few of that person and send it out to family members and say, hey, does anybody know who this is? So it really depends. But again, for more recent photos, if it's my photo collection and I don't know who the person is, there's probably no point in keeping it. Or at the very least, it would go into the B-roll. If the guilt gets to you for throwing it away, that's fine. Put it in the B's.
I think that sounds like a pretty good plan. Let's see if we have a couple other good ones. One person asked, what's the best way to, what are the best apps? Can you recommend apps for rendering slides and negatives? Which again, I am very happy to do. If you're not familiar with Photomyne's slide and film and negative scanning apps, we have one for slides called Slide Scan and one called Filmbox, like I just said, for negatives. And each of these are specific, right? Slide Scan is for slides and Filmbox is for negatives. Both, the process is very similar. You need a backlight. You can use a light pad. We also at Photomyne, we have photomyne.com/backlight is just a white screen. You can use your computer screen, but if you're going to do so, you kind of have to hold your slides and negatives a little bit away from the screen to avoid some pixelation from the, from the screen itself in your scans. That's why we recommend a light pad, because you can just put your negatives and your slides right on the light pad, scan from above. It's really, really simple. And we also have something called a macro lens, which you can attach to your phone while you're scanning. And we have this thing called macro lens mode, where you can actually scan those slides and negatives at a higher quality than the camera on your phone would essentially allow. So if that's something that you're interested in, we highly recommend you check out these apps in the App Store and in Google Play as well. Let's see if we have, right? I know that's, as far as apps are concerned, I think those are pretty great options. Do you have any other non-app solutions that you recommend?
It's the two main forms of scanning that professional photo managers tend to use are either what we call a speed scanner, which is the most popular one right now is made from Epson, the Epson Fast Photo. It's about a $500 investment, so it's not necessarily cheap. But you can scan, you can feed the pictures right through and get some really high quality scans. And then what a lot of us also do, who do this all the time, all day long, is we actually do what's called camera scanning. And we have a very high resolution DSLR camera on a mount that we actually take a photo of, and we get extremely high resolution, scans of the photos. But that's not something that, probably a person, unless they happen to be a professional photographer, would invest in, just to scan their own collection.
Thank you. I think it looks like we have one last question, and I'm pretty curious about this as well. It's, would you recommend printing digital photos for archiving sake?
That is another way to archive them, but consider, I would say that a much better way to archive them is making multiple copies of the digital photos. A print of a digital photo is never going to be as good as the digital photo itself. You've probably even noticed that with prints that you may have made from digital photos. Our whole lives are becoming more and more digital. We'll be viewing photos more and more digitally. And it kind of is going backwards. So for instance, if you're using a print from a digital photo as a backup, and the reason you have a backup is because what happens if that digital photo, the actual digital photo, goes away or, explodes or is lost, your only option then is to scan the print from the digital photo. And you don't want to do that. That's not, that's like making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. The quality just gets worse and worse. So instead of, making prints of digital photos to put in albums just to be able to view them and enjoy them is perfectly fine and is great. But I wouldn't say making thousands of prints of your digital collection is a good way to back them up. I would say I would go back to the 3-2-1 backup rule, which is making multiple backups of your digital collection.
Great, thank you. I think, Cheryl, I think that's it for questions for us
Okay.
today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Thank you. I'm happy to. And again, if anyone has any other follow-up questions, they're happy to email me. Yeah, I love to answer questions. I love to talk about my job. I absolutely, I'm so fulfilled by it. So any questions anybody has, feel free.
Well,
And thank you so much for having me, Matthew. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Thanks for coming. Your passion is clear, and it's really great to see. So we really appreciate having you here. For those of you that were here and stuck through this whole stuck through Cheryl's awesome spiel. Thank you for being here as well. Like I said at the top of the webinar, within the next couple days or so, we'll be sure to send an email with information from us and from Cheryl. So that'll include a recording to the video, to the webinar, just in case you missed anything. It'll also include, like I said, a link to our Amazon page. So if you are looking to scan things and you need a couple, tools that'll make it a little easier and maybe perhaps even better quality, you should definitely check those out as well. We'll have a link to my memory file and include, well, so if you're looking to connect with Cheryl, you can certainly do so. So you don't have to, jot down her email real quick or anything. But with that, I think we're going to end the webinar. And again, thanks so much to Cheryl, and thank you guys for being here and coming to, we really appreciate the greater Photomyne community coming out when we have these events. So we appreciate it. And thanks so much. And we'll see you next time.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody.